When we read a novel or a poem, are we really hunting the hidden meaning in it? Or are we missing the most important thing? The way it is built. In 1925, Boris Eikhenbaum, a Russian critic, threw a challenge to the world. Stop obsessing over psychology, biology, politics, and biography when you read a piece of literature. That is the heartbeat of formalist method. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Dr. Riya Dotto and I make videos on English literature, literary theory, and linguistic topics. If that is something of importance to you, consider subscribing. So today we are going to discuss the essay of Boris Eikhenbaum, The Theory of Formal Method. So without further ado, let us begin. Let's first talk about the context and background. Boris Eikhenbaum was one of the Russian literary scholars and key figures in Russian formalism. He wrote The Theory of Formal Method in 1925 in defense and clarification of the ways the formalist method works. This was the time when the Russian Revolution had changed the way people look at the literature. It changed the cultural climate and people started looking at the political aspects of literature. Formalists were under attack by the Marxists for being ahistorical or apolitical. Eichenbaum's essay was partially a manifesto, an attempt to clarify what the formalists stood for. Now the question is, what is Russian formalism? The main focus of Russian formalism is the study of the literariness of a text. What makes a work a piece of literature? It is not about author's life, social background, or moral lessons. Rather, it is about the devices and techniques used in the construction of the literary pieces. We can talk about one famous slogan by Roman Jacobson. The object of literary science is not literature, but literariness. They distinguished between form and content. They said that the content is all form of communication and literature's uniqueness lies in how the content is constructed. Its form. Now the question is, why did Eichenbaum write this essay? This essay defends formalism against many misunderstandings. The key clarifications are: number one, formalists are not ignoring content. They see content as inseparable from form. Number two, they are not creating abstract formulas. Rather, they study concrete literary devices. Number three, they are not detached from history. They just read history in terms of changes in literary forms, not just political events. Let's now talk about the key concepts of this essay. I'm not going line by line here, rather, I'm discussing the overall essay as well as the key concepts, which will help you to understand the concepts better. In Russian formalist terminology, a Priyom is a device, a deliberate artistic technique used by the authors to use language in a unique way to function in literariness. The examples are metaphors, simile, alliteration, unusual rhymes, unusual syntax, narrative framing, plot twist, parallelism, and repetition. They are not ornamental extras. They are the very devices that make any literary piece unique, or we can say literary. Eichenbaum argues that literature is not a mirror of life, it's a construction, and the building block of that construction are these devices. He talks about another terms, Austraini. The translation is defamiliarization. This is a concept introduced by Viktor Sklovsky and it was embraced by Eichenbaum. He says that the ordinary language is used in a literary piece in a way that makes the reader look at the reality in a fresh and a new way. An example, instead of saying the night is quiet, Tolstoy gives an elaborate description of the night so that the quiet feels uncanny and new. Without devices, a text is just ordinary communication, and with devices, it becomes literature. The next concept we are going to discuss is the autonomy of literature. Eikhenbaum stresses that literature develops due to its own internal principles, not just as a reaction to politics, economy, or the author's biography. He draws an analogy with biology. Just as species evolve with internal mechanisms and mutations, literature evolves because of changes in devices and forms. This does not mean literature is untouched by history, but its primary logic is that change is formal and not external. The example is the shift from the epic poetry to modern novel. This shift was not because of historical events, it was because the narrative devices changed, the reader's expectations changed, and the old forms lost its validity. The third concept we are going to discuss is the evolution of literary form. He says that forms don't stay innovative forever, they get worn out. Devices that once shocked the readers will eventually become conventions, and writers seek new devices to entertain the readers as well as to restore the freshness. The example can be given the rhymes in poetry. When first introduced, it was startling and musical. Over the time, it became predictable. So modern poets turned to free verses to achieve a new expressive freedom. In fiction, the omniscient narrator of the 19th century gave way to the stream of consciousness of the 20th century for the same reason. That is why literature evolves like the ecosystem of techniques. The next concept we are going to discuss is the form versus content debate. Critics often argue that the form is the secondary and the content is the primary, but Eikhenbaum flips it. For him, content is simply the material. Form is the shaping principle that turns it into literature. You cannot have meaning without form because the form defines meaning. For example, a political slogan in prose is agitational, and in sonnet or a piece of poetry, it is reflective or ironic. Form transforms the message. Therefore, analyzing the content alone will miss how literature works. The next concept we are going to discuss is the reader's experience. Eikhenbaum is sometimes accused of ignoring the readers, but he actually talks about the effect. Literary devices are used to get a particular kind of emotion or cognitive reactions of the readers. For example, a cliffhanger ending of a chapter in a novel is not a form of storytelling. It is a way to keep the reader engaged. The way poems rhymes lulls or startles you is not accidental. It is a calculated effect. The next concept we are going to discuss is reductionism. Eikhenbaum was against reductionism. What is reductionism? Many critics try to explain literature through sociology like politics and class struggle and biography, the childhood traumas of the author. Eikhenbaum calls this reductionism. It reduces literature into something that could be explained without even reading the text. He insists if you are not studying how the literary texts work and how the text is constructed, you are studying history or psychology under wrong name. He has given a few examples to prove his points better. First example is Pushkin's The Bronze Horseman. First, he talks about the traditional approach. This 1833 poem is about Peter the Great's vision about St. Petersburg and a catastrophic flood. Historical critics focus on political symbolism, the conflict between the ruler's ambition and the ordinary citizens' lives. Now, the formalist's approach is different. The formalists look at the structure of the poem, how Pushkin uses repetition of key phrases to create rhythm and thematic emphasis. Then we have to notice the alteration of perspectives, shifting from the panoramic view of the city to the intimate perspective of the protagonist Evgeny. Then we need to observe the contrasts in imagery. Grandeur of the city versus vulnerability of the humans. Then we have to pay attention to the sound patterns. Consonance and assonance mimic the roar of the flood water. The effect on the readers is an emotional and aesthetic response created by these devices, which might be more powerful than knowing the historical dates of the flood. Then he gives example of a detective story. It's about a murder, an investigation, and the triumph of justice. But the formalist reading of this detective story shows how the plot is created by withholding information from the reader at the key points. This creates suspense. Foreshadowing is used to make the certain events appear important in the hindsight. Red herrings act as deliberate distractions. The resolution releases tension, gives the reader a sense of closure. Here, the crime itself is just the material. The real artistry lies in the arrangement of clues and revelations. Let's talk about the impact and legacy. Eikhenbaum's essay helped unify the Russian formalists against the attacks of ideologies. It influenced structuralism as well as narratology. There are a lot of criticisms against Eikhenbaum and Russian formalism. Marxists saw this kind of way is too narrow. They also accused formalist criticism ignoring the cultural and historical aspects. Yet its emphasis on the form of text is foundational to literary studies. Eikhenbaum's theory of formal method reminds us that literature is not what it says, it's about how it says it. Every choice of word, rhythm, and structure is a device, a deliberate construction. When we see the craft, we see the magic. And that, Eikhenbaum would say, is the real meaning of reading like a critic. And so that is Boris Eikhenbaum's essay, The Theory of Formal Method. If you like this lecture, give it a thumbs up, and for more breakdowns like this, keep an eye on my channel. Thank you. Bye bye.